Welcome to the Knowledge Cast. This is a look into the world of knowledge management, information management, data management, AI, and everything in between. This is brought to you by Enterprise Knowledge. I'm Zach Wahl, founder and CEO of EK, and today we're speaking with Ashish Kanal. Ashish is a founder and an independent advisor working in knowledge management and organizational learning. And also, I see from your background a very long history within those two intersecting fields. So, Ashish, welcome. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Zach. It's great to be here.
So, Ashish, if you've listened to the podcast before, I always like to ask our guests right up front, what's your definition of knowledge management? It's a field that's seen so much change and frankly has had some bad press over the years. So, how do you explain what you do to people?
So, if I had to define it in a way that's actually useful, KM is the discipline of preventing organizations from forgetting how they make decisions. Most people describe KM as capturing and sharing content, but content is the easy part. The real pain starts when context disappears. Say, for instance, why a pricing expectation was approved, why a particular process was designed, the way it was, why a risk was accepted, what alternatives were considered. When that context isn't preserved, teams keep recreating the same reasoning or worse. They make different decisions without realizing they are repeating the same old mistakes. So for me, a good knowledge management preserves those decision context, makes it reusable. It keeps the organization from resetting every time people move roles. There can be leadership changes or there is a reorg. So any which way, KM should be preserving the entire decision context of the critical knowledge.
I like that a lot. That's new. As you said, a lot of organizations talk about the sort of the traditional actions attached to this, but the idea of ensuring that an organization doesn't forget how decisions or why decisions were made is, I think, a really interesting take on this. So, if we were to expand into that a little bit, Ashish, how does one do that? Right? I love the fact that you're using the word context, but how does this actually translate to, say, a day in the life of a KM professional who has that set of responsibilities?
One way of doing it is, first of all, not getting into the tools, the platforms, and even those frameworks at the start. You need to really study how an organization is working. Where are the decisions which are being taken? What is it that is affecting the top line, the bottom line? Understanding the crux of that will give you a very streamlined idea about like where the fundamental problems are when it comes to knowledge gap. It is basically you are already doing the knowledge audit right at the start itself. Once those fundamentals are in place, then it's easier for you to understand who are the decision makers, what kind of important decisions are being taken, how it is affecting my specific critical elements, which are going to impact ultimately the top line and the bottom line. And then it will be easier for you to pinpoint those and bridge those gaps. Having those conversations with the decision makers, the business unit heads, the people who are in those senior roles, and then building that entire KM framework around that, so that can be a very good starting point as per me.
It's interesting. If we go back to the traditional definition, not yours, but the broader capturing lessons learned, capturing know-how, that's a lot easier. What you just described is much harder. Capturing the moments of when decisions are made and identifying then why those decisions were made. That's very much in the flow of work, and it tends to be done by people that are pretty fast moving and not thinking about capturing that context or that knowledge. So I agree with the general approach that you just said. Understand the business, understand who's making decisions, and then effectively map it, capture it. But I'm going to invoke my daughters here and say, but how? But what? But how? How do you do that? Like, that's so hard to do in most highly complex organizations. As an individual, that seems like a very daunting task in a highly complex organization. So, do you do this iteratively? Do you start with one process? Do you use a team of people and train them? What are your approaches here?
One approach which can be very fruitful is you take one specific business unit, once that business unit, the portion which I mentioned to you, once you have understood the workflow, the entire idea about it, then the best part is to take it as a pilot project. Once you take a sample size and start experimenting with the whole strategy idea, that is where I will begin. That is the point which can lead to either a success or a failure, but at least the repercussions will be contained. If at all it doesn't work out, you can do the course correction. There can be several layers to it, wherein it can be modified, it can be rechecked with the stakeholders, and it can be worked upon. So you mentioned lessons learned, you mentioned case studies. These are the outcomes, right? But where exactly the problem lies? Say, for example, for me, there have been cases wherein the pre-sales team or the sales team, they were finding it difficult when it came to the customers asking them very specific targeted questions about a particular service or a product that the organization is offering. If in case they were interested in certain specific use case, they were trying to figure out, like within the organization, whom to approach, where exactly that specific knowledge is lying. So if you understand that particular dynamic, that okay, this is where those conversations are happening, this is where that exact issue is happening as a knowledge management professional, then you can target those. Then you can go ahead, be a spokesperson for that salesperson, and then have the conversation with a delivery lead or a person who is in the support function. You can understand that this is the actual business gap which is there. You are filling that business gap rather than going over there and asking that, okay, I have a set of cases which needs to be captured as a case study, or these are the project templates, lessons learned. Please fill it up. People may do it just for the sake of doing it. And you might have seen it across different spectrum of people who might have been coming out and saying that, okay, it is very difficult to convince the top management or to convince very specific critical stakeholders to ask their teams to be a part of the entire KM ecosystem or the framework. They will follow certain aspects just for the sake of doing it, not because it is helping them out. So, but if you bridge that gap, so that is where the whole idea is. And I have seen this as a success in certain segments of my experience. Of course, I won't say it's a success overall, but there are more chances that if you help companies, if you help certain business stakeholders answer their customers or fill that gap, then they will be right on board. You won't have to sell KM every single time. You can use them as your evangelists into within the organization.
Yeah. So you focus on specific business units, specific processes, you solve specific problems. In other words, you're plugging gaps, right? And that's great. What does it look like from your perspective when you're done? You mentioned the outcome, right? Is it an article? Is it knowledge at the point of need that's delivered to the next, as you say, salesperson or pre-sales person? What does an artifact look like when you've done it right?
See, it is always the reuse. So if I have to talk about like matrix, if you are talking about like KPIs or matrix, or whether my entire KM ecosystem is a success or a subset of that is a success, then it all boils down to KM that we have implemented. Is it helping in making those specific decisions? That particular instance of time is required wherein they have to cross check. Say, for example, as I mentioned earlier, if a salesperson is checking out or they are connecting with customer or they are cross-selling, upselling, they are working with a distributor, there is a query which is coming in. So if they have to answer that query, if that particular subset of knowledge is readily available for them at the instance when they are speaking with the client, that is where I will say the KM is successful. Otherwise, you may be having like a million documents, a million content which is sitting on your repository, but if there is no reuse, if nobody is going over there and using it at the critical moment, everything is a failure.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like this is a really common issue with a lot of KM initiatives is that all this effort is put into generating the knowledge in an explicit form, capturing it, but then not enough thought is put into delivering that knowledge. And you kind of echoed one of my favorite phrases here, knowledge at the point of need. So in the flow of business, you're getting the right stuff to the right people to reduce friction, to just make it easier for them to get their job done. Can you talk to me? I mean, you've got such a long history. Give me a success story of how you delivered captured knowledge at the point of need.
I was working with one of chemical firms. People didn't even know, for example, technical sales professionals, R&D professionals, people from safety, people in the legal framework, the regulatory framework. They were finding it very difficult when it came to what the organization sells in terms of products, in terms of services, in terms of formulations in different geographies. So if in case they had any query, if they had any issues which were coming up, one of the only thing they had to do was either they refer to their own personal notes or they reach out to very specific individuals. And that is, they had to rely on if there has been certain person who has been in the organization, the network is very strong. So it was all network based. So when we started, one simple ask was convert this entire thing into digital format. We thought, hold on, let's take a step back. Let's ask the stakeholders where exactly the issue is, where the problem is, and then try to go back and try to get those databases sorted. So once we understood the solution, one use case at a time. So we went in for basic plastics or specialty chemicals. We understood, okay, this specific area, this specific geography, this specific issue with regulatory compliance, there the issue is lying. Now let's start collating the knowledge. So first it was just collating the safety data sheets, the technical data sheets, putting them in order, making it readily available, converting into a database format for the end users so that they could easily search for it. Then we went in for, okay, you have been interacting with different set of stakeholders. And can you convert these into your case studies? Because you already have those as ready reckoners sitting in your desktop and all. From there, we started building it. It took time, took patience, took lots of back and forth. There were times wherein we had to actually rethink whether this strategy is going to work because there was a lot of explanation to be done to the upper management also. Once those were done, we started building it. We realized that people were actually using it. Then there were instances wherein people were asking us, can you make it mobile? During those days, it was a big deal if an organization could provision the internal database itself onto a handheld device. The days of
Yeah.
BlackBerry, you and me know
Oh, yeah.
it's very well.
Unfortunately.
Yes. So we started working towards it, competitor analysis, all those data sets available, ensuring that if in case there is a situation wherein particular geography requirement is there, but the expert who is sitting in a different geography, it's a downtime for them, then this database is readily available on a handheld device. Made it available, and then it was like the cross-selling, the upskillings started to peak. We could showcase that particular hard evidence that how we are impacting the top line into our results. But as I said earlier, it took not months, it took years together.
It's a great story, and there's so much to unpack about that. To me, one of the greatest successes is when you're giving the end user, the stakeholder, the opportunity to traverse different types of knowledge. And what you just talked about is not just knowledge, but content, data. You've got your material safety data sheet that you can then traverse over to a case study that you can, I assume, traverse to an actual expert. This is the sort of lineage where you're bringing together all of an organization's different assets in a way that makes sense. The fact that you were doing it on a BlackBerry or one of these antique mobile devices is pretty impressive and was pretty ahead of the time. Where you ended is where I want to go, which was you measured the value of. And again, this is where in my entire 26 years of this, and I think you're a contemporary, so about the same amount of time, this is where the projects rise and fall, right? Could you show value to the organization? How did you measure it? What was it? Was it faster upskilling time? Was it speed to decision for you in that particular case or in another case? What are your favorite KM measures of success?
If the KM is working, we should be seeing fewer repeated escalations. So, as you also said, faster onboarding in complex roles, less rework, improved consistency across teams, shorter decision cycles for recurring problems. We should be able to see that higher trust in the ecosystem. People should be using those shared knowledge instead of pinging individuals, waiting for those coffee breaks, or going a floor down, a building away, or picking up the phone, calling up the people. Rather than capturing those vanity metrics, I will prefer to start with something which is easy to quantify. Say, for example, search success rates, time to answer a question, the reuse rates of approved assets, reduction in duplicate work, even quality metrics. Say, for example, fewer errors in regulated processes. But I will say the bigger signal is what has stopped happening. Fewer fires caused by the same repeated root causes. So that's real knowledge management matrix, I will say.
And you nailed it, right? If you can prove that your work has led to less repeated mistakes, right? Every organization makes mistakes, but the idea of learning from a mistake and not repeating it is worth absolutely millions. The question becomes, how do you measure that? I think it's easier today, and we can get how AI can help do some of those measures. But in your history, how have you found it effective to measure that less repeated errors or mistakes are occurring?
See, there are different, I will say, methodology of measuring. As I said earlier, if you are in the game wherein you have been interacting with the specific stakeholders, then it's easier for you to quantify. Many a times they come back to you with a problem use case, and once KM is providing that specific set of solutions, it's easier to have those conversations, get started, get that feedback, whether this is working for you, whether this is something which we can convert into an actual KPI. You can do those sample analysis, or the ones which I earlier said, the click-through rate, the search success matrix and all. Obviously, there are different analytic engines which are there. Earlier, we had to build that entire thing right from scratch. Some of them are freely available, but most of them are through pay through a SaaS model. You have to pay and get those all those deep down analytics and basically synthesize all the data and then showcase. Other is as you go along, if you are doing specific, for example, road shows and everything, you can ask the people right on the flow what is working for them, what is not working for them. If in case it is not working for them, I will say don't be disheartened. Go back, cross check what exactly is the thing which will work. So devil is in the details, as say always. Get to the details. Have those conversations. Once you have those conversations, the matrix which most we see from the knowledge management angle, it will stop being vanity metrics and it will be real time matrix. I won't prefer going in for a significant amount of graphs, information. Nobody is bothered with it. I mean, top management is not looking for that kind of matrix. It's good to have it, but have the ones, only the specific ones which help the businesses, the functions, be it support function, be it the actual business.
There it is. I mean, to me, when it comes to KM value, you just got to chase the dollar signs. It's so hard to do, but if you can tie your work to money saved, then you will be successful and it will stick. Let's talk a little bit about the intersection of knowledge management and learning and development. I look at your LinkedIn page and you've got a lot of pretty impressive titles that tie those two things together. Ashish, talk to me a little bit about how you've approached KM and learning and development as two complementary fields.
So I don't see knowledge management and L&D as separate disciplines. I see them as two halves of the same continuity problem. Learning changes behavior in the moment. KM basically ensures that the change survives after the moment passes.
I like that.
Most organizations they treat L&D as episodic. A course is delivered, a workshop happens, maybe a certification is earned. But unless the learning is embedded into the workflows, the playbooks, the decision logs, and the knowledge assets, it all fades. So L&D without knowledge management becomes inspiration without memory.
You're invoking to me, you're reminding me of the classic statistic. If you sit in a class, you retain about 20% of it. But if you actually do it, you can retain as much as 80, 90% of it. And so what you're talking about is KM is the stickiness to how people learn within an organization. Is that fair?
And there is one more element to it. On the other side, KM without L&D is also static, right? You can beautifully structure those repositories, those content databases. But if people don't understand how to interpret, how to apply and question that knowledge, it basically is not translating into performance, right? That's where learning comes in. It activates the knowledge. The way I approach both of them architecturally, when a learning intervention is designed, so I ask what knowledge artifacts will be updated, what decision frameworks will be reinforced, what test set expertise needs to be externalized. And when KM is designed, simultaneously I will ask how people will be enabled to use this meaningfully and what behaviors need to shift. When both of these are aligned, KM doesn't sit in systems and learning doesn't sit on those very fancy slide decks. They basically reinforce each other, and the execution, I will say, is becoming more consistent. I will say that is when we start seeing all those real capability development and not just have KM and L&D for activity's sake.
Yeah, so it becomes less box checking and more about actually changing the organization, implementing or influencing how people actually behave and act. I think that makes a ton of sense. So
Yeah, in simple terms, sorry, I intervened you. But in simple terms, I say like I have a learning center. There is a soft skill program that is being done. I ask certain specific functions to nominate the individuals who should be going through a specific soft skill program. And then they go, they attend it. Everything is good. They achieve whatever percentages are supposed to be attended. They should be getting everything, get a certificate, walks away. The matrix is shown. But is these soft skills earned? Are they getting translated into real time basis? If not, then it's problematic, right? If I'm exposing that particular set of individuals to clients and they are unable to utilize those soft skills on real time basis, then that entire budget which has been given for that particular activity, it's of no use.
once again, all about the outcomes. So let's talk, Ashish, about AI. We had to get there sooner or later. In our rapidly changing world, these industries are really being impacted quickly. How have you seen the latest in AI impacting your work, how you do your job, how the organizations can do KM and learning in these different ways?
Honestly, the biggest change is that AI is forcing knowledge management to grow up. So for years, organizations could get away with shallow knowledge management, a repository, say for example, a portal, some search, few communities. It wasn't perfect, but people could compensate through relationships and tribal knowledge. So AI has changed all of that quite a lot. It is not going to fix weak knowledge. On the contrary, it is exposing it. And then it is amplifying the consequences. We see all those hallucinations, and then we keep going back to the drawing board, trying to figure out where exactly the problem is. Why my knowledge data set is not behaving the way it is supposed to behave when the AI layer is coming and sitting on top of it. What is exciting me in these times is that we now have a real reason to move from content libraries to knowledge that is heavily structured, contextualized, and grounded in reality in the actual business use cases. And that is where the semantic layer, the knowledge graphs, provenance, versioning, decision traces, all of it starts becoming important. Even the knowledge artifacts which you mentioned earlier or which we were discussing in terms of the case studies, the lessons learned, the success stories, the failures, all of that will start coming out of these. So not because they are fancy, but because they make the knowledge reliable enough to be utilized by the humans and also the algorithms.
It's kind of amazing, isn't it? As we said, we've been doing this about a quarter century and have through much of that time been trying to share the value of metadata, taxonomies, ontologies, semantics. Now, all of a sudden, the world is waking up to it. As you said, AI is shining a light on organizations that have not kept their KM house in order, have not managed semantics, have not applied metadata that gives context. So it's kind of exciting, right? Are you seeing that you're more in, it's easier to explain the value of your role? It's easier to get into the room?
I will say it's something similar to what we saw during COVID, right? The experts who have been working since years, decades together on figuring out the vaccines, they are studying the genomes, they are studying so many different viruses, bacteria, fungi. Suddenly they came right in the forefront. We have been like, now we know what is the importance. Same is the case with the knowledge graphs. The people who have been working diligently on the semantics, on the taxonomy, they never got that kind of a limelight, but that is changing a bit. I will say quite significantly for the organizations which are investing heavily in AI, and they are realizing that having a perfect structured knowledge data sets in order, it's important if you want to see the actual results on the ground when you are engaging anything remotely with AI.
Well said. And to me, it's absolutely the difference maker, right? If you simply plug in the AI black box and say, let's get it to answer questions, you're going to get a ton of bad results. It's going to be looking at old knowledge assets that are poorly structured. You used the example earlier about different answers in different regions. Black box AI does a terrible job of that. But if instead an organization has invested in the quality of their assets, structuring and relating those assets, all of a sudden you're finding those edge cases of AI actually adding the business value within organizations. And it's exciting and validating to see.
KnowledgeCast is brought to you by Enterprise Knowledge, the world's largest dedicated knowledge management consultancy. From training to benchmarks, strategy, design, prototyping, and all the way to enterprise-level implementations, Enterprise Knowledge wants to be your services partner. Spanning the fields of knowledge management, knowledge graphs, data, learning, advanced content management, and enterprise artificial intelligence, contact us at info@enterprise-knowledge.com to discuss how we can support you.
Where are you in all of this today? Have you seen the successes of AI? Have you been one of those minority organizations that is actually getting AI into production?
So I will share an actual business use case. We had been diligently collating project related lessons learned. When I say lessons learned, was the success as well as the failure, the reason, the context. For a couple of years while we were doing it, it was a painful process. All of this comes to the forefront when in case the same kind of issues come up during particular project cycle, or if in case a client is specifically asking for it or some use case happens, then only people start touting for those. But then when the AI and all the buzz was going around, we thought, let's do one thing. We already have a amazing data set of lessons learned. Let's try to experiment, see how we can expose this and make a GPT available for the end users and see if whole library of lessons learned can be reutilized in certain use cases. When we started building on it, I had all the taxonomy, everything, metadata, everything was perfectly in order. It took us some time. We built it. We exposed it to a delivery team, asked them to use it, did some sampling, did some pilot case studies. For some time, it was sitting idle. And then suddenly, when there was a completely new opportunity which came up and there were some project issues which happened, people started engaging with our GPT. And that is where we realized that, okay, this is actually making sense for the delivery teams. They are finding the benefits out of it. They are able to pinpoint, okay, this is an issue which had happened in the past, and this is the solution which was operated. And then from there, we could also build on certain use cases wherein we actually could build on new knowledge artifacts. So our engine was actually also pushing out probable issues that can come out in the future, which we then showcase to our set of SMEs to get feedback. If in case such issues come out, what can be the potential solution? What should be the workflow that needs to be followed to mitigate this risk? It was like we were getting better prepared for the foreseeable future. That's one of the use cases which I have seen that it has been a pretty good success.
I think, Ashish, what you just said, it needs to be magnified because it's the organizations that actually nobody could have guessed how quickly AI technology was going. Or I don't know, maybe somebody did who's way smarter than me. But it's the organizations that were already making the right investments in KM, that were already capturing the lessons learned, were structuring their content, were doing the semantics, that are getting the greatest outcomes from AI. They didn't know that it was all going to fuel successful AI. They were doing it because it was just good practice, right? Because they had leaders like you. But it's, I think, really gratifying, and it's going to be exciting for our listeners to hear how all the hard work that KM professionals and others have been putting into their organizations for years can be the fuel that gets AI working reliably with context, with trust, with outcomes. You said something else there that I want to go back to, and it's been coming up more and more. Over our history, if there's a document, you could pretty much assume that a human wrote that document or a set of humans. But we're now in a place where there's a binary. It's not just a human that might have written it, it's potentially a machine. So new knowledge assets are being generated rather than being written, or said differently, they're being written by a machine, right? How do you treat within a mature organization those generated knowledge assets versus a written one? Are they different fundamentally? Do you rely on them differently? Do you trust them differently? Do you specify that something was written by a machine rather than a human?
I have this firm belief, and I've been sticking to it unless someone comes up with a theory which resonates more, is you can't allow AI or algorithm basically to be the decision maker. It can create a knowledge artifact based on the past historical records that it has been exposed to. But a human in the loop element is always required. That subject matter expert needs to be there. You cannot leave the decisions with the algorithm. You do that, and there are serious repercussions. I have been working in the heavily regulated space. So over there, one mistake can cost millions, billions of
And
dollars
lives.
and lives. Yep. There are humongous repercussions. You can have knowledge artifacts created by AI on several topics. You can use it to structure your thought process. You can have a very good exposure to whatever knowledge library that you have got, everything you can do. But when it comes to the end result, that AI takes a decision, okay, this is the right safety protocol that needs to be followed, or this is the cyber security insight which is there, or this is something which goes into clinical operations, or this is something in the regulatory body. I'm not going to do it without a human in the loop element.
I've seen how that movie ends. I don't want AI making the decisions. You're absolutely right. But I do believe fundamentally that we can arm the human to make decisions with a more complete set of information, right? That's kind of what we're talking about, is generating a more complete collection of knowledge that would allow them to make the most informed decision in the most expeditious manner. And I think that that's where we can see KM and AI and learning all coming together to deliver business value quickly. Ashish, talk to me a little bit about your own history. Uniquely, I see knowledge management in your entire bio, going all the way back to the beginning, which is pretty unusual. So many times, so a lot of my guests and a lot of the people that I talk to in the field, myself included, kind of stumbled into the field. But it looks like your path was very purposeful. Is that right?
Kind of. Kind of. Zach, if you don't mind, can we go back to the previous question? So, say, as I was saying, AI generated knowledge should never be, I will say, treated as knowledge by default. It's always a draft. At best, I will say it's probabilistic synthesis. So, the discipline should always lie in how we are validating and integrating it into our set of processes, the regulatory compliance, the governance frameworks, and all. So I will say first, we will have to establish the provenance. Every AI that is getting generated, all the outputs that are being AI generated, it must have the traceable source material first, the constraints that have been levied, the version history, and if we can't answer like what it is based on, then I will say it is not enterprise grade knowledge. It's only specifically content that we are talking about. Second, I will say we need to separate generation from authorization. I will say, see, AI can propose, right? But as I said earlier, human in the loop element, human should always validate, especially in regulated, higher risk, or strategic domains. The approval workflow of that specific AI generated content, that needs to be very explicit. There should be role based reviews. It needs to have subject matter validation. There needs to be compliance sign off. The third element is we need to embed AI into structured knowledge environments. If AI is operating over a very systematically grounded, curated knowledge base, which is from my organization, then only its outputs are anchored. But if it's drawing completely loosely from, say, governed repository, the hallucination risk rises a lot. So my entire knowledge architecture needs to be a control layer. The fourth element is we need to create the feedback loops. If the AI generated content leads to, say, corrections, then the corrections must flow back into the system, the entire system. So otherwise, the same error will reappear in a different form. So again, it is back to the hallucination portion. AI systems need to have those reinforcements from the real world use cases. And finally, I will say that we need to define the risk tiers. We discussed earlier, not all knowledge carries equal consequence. Say, for example, I have a document, I need it to be reformatted. It carries very low risk. But a policy interpretation, it's a very high risk. I go wrong over there are serious consequences. So governance should scale with that particular impact. Going back to your question, is the AI right? Can I treat it as the sole knowledge creator, generator in this era? So the question is, do we have those governance, the structure, the accountability mechanisms to treat AI outputs as the candidate for knowledge, not the automatic truth? So that's where KM and AI governance, I will say, will intersect.
There's a lot there that I frankly really agree with. I think to go back to the original question, the answer, you and I agree, if a knowledge asset is generated by AI rather than originated or authored by a human, the organization needs to know that. Frankly, it needs to be a new tag. It needs to be clear when knowledge has been automatically generated. I really like your point on provenance as well. We've been talking about black box AI versus explainable AI. Explainable AI, but being the glass box instead of the black box. What sources were used to generate this knowledge? What was the reasoning involved? That sort of understanding is what gives an organization confidence that they can use it, trust it. It still needs to obviously have the human in the loop, but it's a big difference, right? You've touched on governance, and I feel like we could spend a whole nother hour talking about that. I want to highlight one point and ask how you've addressed it so far. Even the best designed glass box AI with all the right graphs and ontologies and taxonomies and everything else is still going to make a mistake every now and again. What is your thinking on how that human should be in the loop? Is this experts spot checking the AI? Is it everybody responsible for flagging something that doesn't look right to them, and then that kicks off a review process? What's the right way to address an AI error?
We should be defining the knowledge classes. Not everything deserves the same scrutiny. So our formatting suggestion, like we discussed, right? Our formatting suggestion for a low risk FAQ answer can move quickly. A regulatory interpretation, clinical decision, financial model, contractual clause, those cannot. As simple as that. So we tier the knowledge by consequence. Second, you separate the generation from the authorization. AI can draft, it cannot approve. Have those. So when something is generated, it needs to go through them at a specific point in time. So those specific workflows need to be embedded. So those review mechanism, it needs to be within that workflow. So if the governance is failing, then it's a problematic issue. In one use case, it can be like if the AI is generating content inside a, say, for example, a ticketing system, a CRM interface, or a knowledge base, the review prompt should sit right over there, not in a totally separate portal. What will happen is it will make this entire loop friction free, and there won't be any option to bypass the system. As we discussed earlier, the provenance and the traceability, it's non negotiable. The source from which the AI is generating the artifact, the references, all of that lineage should be showcased. So, what corpus were used, which exact version was used, what constraints were there, and something goes wrong, we should be able to trace it back. While we were testing one of the AI use cases, which I mentioned earlier, the lessons learned and all, there were instances wherein some of those lessons learned were confidential in nature. They were specific to a particular set of audience. But when we exposed it to the AI engine, we realized that some of those good whether I can say good or whatever be the use case, that those GPTs, they just bypassed it and they showcased certain confidential set of information even to the audience which were not supposed to see it in the first place. Forget about supposed to see it, they shouldn't have been aware that that exists in the first place. So that is something which we need to be aware of. That is where those governance, human in the loop elements needs to be there. It takes time, right? We can't build it right from day one itself. Even though you may be having an amazing knowledge library, an amazing semantics layer, taxonomy engine, everything is there, but still this kind of a use case, it can put you in a very tricky situation.
Ashish, you just hit on, I think, what's going to be one of the next big stumbling blocks. We've been referring to this as unified entitlements. But in the same way that organizations that have a bunch of old or obsolete content, have poorly tagged their content, are struggling with AI, organizations that have done a bad job of addressing their security and access are in for a world of pain when AI starts exposing that dark data, those files that should be confidential but weren't secured properly. I think that's going to be one of the big challenges of 2026 for organizations that have begun to make progress with AI. So I'm glad you raised that.
And over here, we can also utilize what KM experts have been doing for ages together now. You and me know, right, that we always used to have in the content management library the feedback loops. People could flag certain set of knowledge that this is something which is not resonating, this is out of date, this is contextually wrong. So those feedback loops, it's already there nowadays in GPTs. I don't have to spell it out. It's already there. The people who are building it, they have that maturity wherein it's easier. But the whole idea is whether it is getting flagged, those errors are getting flagged or not. Because if the humans are not doing it, then it's a problem, right?
This is where we can rename the podcast. Zach and Ashish have been right all along. We've been saying this stuff for 25 years. It's just that AI is magnifying a lot of the reasons why the stuff matters. Hey, let's go back to the other question. I know we're running out of time.
Well, last thing, Zach, see, when we had deployed this, there was another element that incentives matter. In KM, incentives has always mattered, right? Even over here, incentive always matters. So if reviewers are overloaded, because it happens, right? We are busy with so many things, then the governance will obviously collapse. And I have seen this way too often. If we have those incentives wherein people are engaged, they are motivated to actually review the output which the AI is giving in. Once that is there, there will be more value protection and will stop being an administrative burden.
Agree. Tell me about what is your favorite incentive? Not every organization can bonus people based on good behavior. So what sort of incentives do you see working most effectively?
Psychologically, human incentive one is the recognition. But here's the thing, don't make it superficial. Don't give it to each and every person who hasn't even contributed.
Not everybody gets a trophy.
Yeah. It's not a marathon, right?
Yeah.
You
Very
complete the
good.
cross line even after the hours is passed and you get a medal. No, it's not going to
Excellent.
happen. You need to actually add value.
So you incentivize good behavior by shining a light on it, by magnifying the people that have contributed, provided the feedback, and you'll get a positive loop from that. I agree.
Build it into the PMR.
Yeah.
Build it into the PMR if organization has that option. Have those conversations with the leadership team.
Do you tie that then to promotions, to bonuses? Can you create such an impactful piece of this such that people actually get to move up in the organization because they've exhibited good behavior around what we're talking about here?
There can be some weightage points. I won't say it is the only or one of the only primary KPIs which should be measured for a person's performance. But if in case the person has been contributing and performing really very well for these kind of scenarios, then obviously they get those specific brownie points. See, times are changing, right? So even the good old PMR cycle can have elements which can help the organizations in the longer run.
Yeah, I agree. Your background?
Oh, yeah. I will say I did not set out to build a career in knowledge management per se. My journey started in information and research roles. So I was working with one of the major nuclear scientific organizations in the country. So I was part of the scientific information division over there. So we were taking care of documentation, and the whole environment was research and development centric. This was the place where precision mattered a lot. If something gets wrong, so serious consequences. During that cycle, very early on, I noticed that, okay, organizations or my particular organization was not specifically struggling with the lack talent, or there was no lack of talent. They were basically struggling that the knowledge was very fragmented. Critical insights, they were sitting in people's tacit memory, inboxes, certain documented folders and all. There were specific projects which were there, critical projects. All the lessons that were captured, they were just in bound volumes, and people came in, they referred to them when the requirement was there, but it wasn't exactly available to them at their fingertips.
Mhm.
When the issue happened, they had to actually put in loads of effort doing it. And many new teams, the new players who were joining the organization, they were basically reinventing the wheel every single time. So the same reinvention of work was happening. So this pattern was something which I was seeing a lot. And then things were happening in the corporate world, wherein I saw that this pattern was being addressed in a more scientific, structured way through knowledge management. So I took an informed decision that I want to get into this particular field of work. It was exciting for me. I got into knowledge management through being part of the corporate cycle. First, it started with oil and gas, then went into chemicals, consultancy, did my own entrepreneurship, went into FMCG and different segments. So, short, brief journey of mine.
Quarter century of success, I would say, and you've contributed a lot to the field. So, on behalf of our listeners, thank you for that. We'll close with this. For somebody who wants to have a career like yours, what would you recommend to them? How does somebody get started on a path like yours?
For someone starting out, I would say don't begin with tools or platforms or even those frameworks. Many instances I've seen people terming knowledge management all about technology
Mhm.
or the platforms, and it dies over there. Start studying how the work is actually happening on the ground. What is it that is breaking, where decisions are not happening, what do people, where people are going when they need a answer in critical moments, what is getting recycled, repeated, what gets escalated, where the decisions are being made. Where is it where the context is actually vanishing when the decision has to be made? And once you understand those patterns, that will be where you will be able to build the knowledge management that fits the reality, not that idealized version of KM.
I love that. So forget know thyself, know thy organization, understand the actual business, and the rest will follow. That's great.
One other thing is learn the fundamentals: taxonomy, semantics, metadata, search behavior, knowledge types. How do you convert those knowledge types from tacit knowledge to implicit to explicit? Even realize where the power center lies in terms of decision making. Understand some of the politics of the organization.
Oh yeah, that is all great. What's your favorite resource? Where do you go to learn some of those fundamentals?
Speak with people, speak with seniors, have those conversations, take them maybe for a coffee, ask those difficult questions. See, out of 10, maybe one will give you some time. Once you start doing it, you get the nitty gritties. You understand, like, okay, this is where things are breaking, this is where they need help. Maybe you will find a mentor who can help out.
I think that's great. And I think our field is full of people that want to help and are willing to take that time. So I fully endorse that idea. Ashish
Yeah,
Kanal, what oh, sorry. I was gonna close things out.
utilize LinkedIn as much as you can. Actually, to be honest, the newer generation, they have those opportunities, right? They have the social media right at their fingertips. Reach out to those experts. Don't just say hi and vanish.
Yeah, actually, yeah, and I do. I would agree with that. ask people for help, ask them for time. And I think everybody would be pleasantly surprised by the number of people that say yes as a result.
Yeah, ask those questions.
Yeah, you did.
The worst
Thank
that
you for
can
that, by the
happen.
way.
On the
Uh,
contrary, you did it.
Ashish Kanal, wonderful conversation and really appreciate it. To our listeners, thank you for joining this episode of Knowledge Cast. And to learn more, visit our website at enterprise-knowledge.com.